My name is Dr. Riley Kirk. I am a natural product chemist, and I currently work at Smokenol / Profound Naturals / Real Isolates.
We must work untiringly so that our children are obliged to learn the truth. Because it is only through knowledge that we can safely protect them.
You're listening to the Curious About Cannabis podcast. Special thanks to our current annual educational event sponsors, including The Workshop, CBD National, and Green Earth Medicinals. If you want to learn more about our Curious About Cannabis events, go to cacpodcast.com/events. And if your company would like to become an event sponsor, visit cacpodcast.com/sponsors to learn more. Hey everybody, this is Jason with Curious About Cannabis. Thanks so much for tuning in once again. Today I am really excited to finally be sitting down with a fellow natural product scientist and cannabis educator that I've been following as long as I know that they've been making content. I'm here with Dr. Riley Kirk from Real Isolates, and you may be familiar with the Smokenol product that they have released recently that's caused quite a buzz. Dr. Kirk, thanks so much for being willing to come on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I love this podcast, and I love what you're doing for the cannabis and natural products community, and I'm excited to talk about all things nature.
Excellent. Yes. Thanks so much for the kind feedback. I'm glad that you've managed to catch some episodes. And yeah, we have a lot to talk about because your interests and my interests overlap in a ton of ways, not just in cannabis, but natural product science in general. And something I always try to do with the show is shine light, not just on cannabis, but how understanding the science of cannabis can help us understand the science of other interesting medicinal plants, how understanding the endocannabinoid system can help us understand how other medicinal plants affect the body, etc. So I think we have a ton to dive into. So this should be really interesting, and we'll see how far we spin out in the hour. But I know there's plenty of directions we can go. To start us out, we'll start at the classic place to start, which is, how did you find yourself caught up in cannabis science? I know you have a natural product science background, you're a natural products chemist, but where did your journey with cannabis really start to kick off, and how did you find yourself with Real Isolates and working on Smokenol?
Sure, yeah. So my journey with cannabis, I guess, officially started when I was 14 years old, and I started using cannabis. And it just reacted so well with my body, and I really never stopped using it after. Like, I've been using it essentially since I was 14 years old. So, after I graduated from undergrad, I kind of didn't know what to do with my life, like a lot of people don't. And I kind of just worked at a biotech company outside of Boston as an immunology scientist. As I was working there, I was like, man, I'm kind of just doing what a robot could do. Like, I don't really love what I'm currently doing. So I wanted to have just a little more control, a little more creativity. So I started looking into these different grad programs, but I wasn't just going to go to grad school to go to grad school. Like, I was very adamant about being very specific. If I was going to go to a program, it's going to be something that I really want to do. And eventually, after I'm searching all these different keywords, I find this word pharmacognosy, which kind of breaks down to the knowledge of pharma, because it was the first field of, pharmaceutical sciences ever, because back when they were first discovering which plants were bioactive, all they had was plants and fungi. They didn't have actual drugs and drug sciences at that time. So I kind of go down this absolute rabbit hole looking into this word, looking further into it, looking at different programs. Do I want to get a master's? Do I want to get a PhD, et cetera, et cetera? And actually, somebody I was working with at the time at this biotech company, they said, oh my gosh, my daughter's boyfriend is in a natural products program at the University of Rhode Island. I'll connect you guys. You guys can talk, you can hang out, whatever. So I went down to URI and I spoke with him. He was incredibly informative. I spoke with all the different people that were part of that program, the different grad students, the different professors. And I was like, wow, I definitely could see myself going here. So it was the only school I applied to. One school, I was like, hey, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I mean, I don't know if that was a sign of like, do you actually want to go? But I did apply. I got in. That was great. And then through my time in grad school, I was studying dozens and dozens of different medicinal plants. The URI has a medicinal plant library or a garden outside. And, you know, part of my dissertation was studying that garden and the different plants and the different medicinal compounds that are produced by those plants in that garden. But where cannabis comes into play here is towards the end of my grad school journey, URI started a medicinal cannabis kind of a certificate program, and they needed a teaching assistant for it. Nobody knew anything about cannabis except me because I had researched it just in my own time, and I've done a little bit of work with CBD and hemp during grad school. And anytime cannabis came up in grad school, everyone's like, Riley? Because everyone knew I smoked weed. Like, it was very, very obvious. I present myself as a stoner, and that's fine. So I got chosen as like the TA for that course. And as I'm kind of working through and, you know, helping teach these courses, it kind of frustrated me how much money they were charging for these courses, because I think everyone should be able to have this information of how cannabis interacts with the body, especially from like a higher education, if that's what you're looking for. And it was charging a lot of money. It really wasn't accessible to anyone. And so kind of during the time that the pandemic started, I was like, I'm going to start a TikTok channel and I'm going to make educational content about cannabis. And it wasn't like, I was not like regurgitating the stuff from the course. I was just doing things that I thought were the most interesting, the most relevant.
Yeah.
Exactly. And honestly, as a harm reduction strategy too, because, you know, I've tried a bunch of different things. Some went really well for me and some I was like, ooh, I'm never doing that again. And I want to share that with people so they don't have bad experiences with cannabis or other natural products, and they can go into using them with a little more confidence and just feeling that, like, they have some sort of background. Or if, you know, their parents or their grandparents or their friends kind of ask them questions about cannabis, I want them to be able to talk about the endocannabinoid system, talk about how these molecules interact with your body, and kind of just give them tools to succeed when discussing with people, discussing with anyone about cannabis and natural products, because it is legitimate science, but the communication tools need to be there or it's difficult.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting. Yeah, so I've seen some of the same things. You know, there's a lot of schools right now popping up that are building cannabis science programs of one sort or another. And you're right that there's a huge kind of disconnect, because I think there's a big disconnect in how education as a whole works. But particularly in higher education, the cost, you know, it's all indexed off of assumptions that, well, these students, they have student loans. They're already paying, you know, this money anyway. So we can charge $600, $1,000, $2,000, whatever, a credit. And someone's paying it, whether the government's paying it, a loan provider's paying it, someone will pay it. And to an extent, that's true, but it's kind of fucked up. You know, it's a very, it reminds me of healthcare and the way that healthcare prices get elevated and elevated because of insurance. And so there has been a very stark need for accessible education, for sure. And I know from following you that you jumped on TikTok and you were making all these videos. That was the first thing I ever saw. I do know that you ran into trouble. It didn't take very long before you started to experience a lot of things I've experienced, of having videos taken down, all sorts of issues around that. So do you mind speaking a little bit about your experience there of, you know, there's words that you're not supposed to type. There's all sorts of different things. So can you shed a little bit of light on what it's like when you decide, yes, I do want to try to educate the masses and make this accessible, but it's not quite as easy as people think.
No, it's not. And I didn't just run into trouble. Like, I am in trouble. I'm still dealing with this. Like,
you are the trouble.
Yeah, I today got off of a 5-day ban from TikTok from a video I posted in February. It's December, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
So something changed, and essentially the algorithm changes constantly. Like, sometimes I can make videos and I say, this is how THC affects your sleep cycle. Like, that's fine. And then other videos, if I just say the word THC, it'll get removed, or even CBD or hemp or cannabis, any of them will get removed, regardless if it's just strictly educational or not. Like, it's incredibly variable. It's incredibly challenging. And then, you know, you try to push people to other platforms like, hey, check out my YouTube channel. But making YouTube videos is very difficult. It is very time consuming.
Yes.
Whereas making a TikTok, it's like, okay, I could do that in 5 minutes. Like something that I find interesting, set up my phone, talk into it for a couple minutes, post. YouTube, it's like you record on your phone, you upload on something else, you have to edit it, you have to do all these things. It can take hours. And, you know, if you're working other jobs, it's very difficult to find that motivation constantly to keep making that kind of content. And it's not just TikTok either. I don't know if you've tried to look me up on Instagram, but I've been gone.
You were gone for a while.
Well, I'm gone again.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that you're gone again.
Oh, yeah. That only lasted for 2 days. I was back for literally 2 days and then deleted.
Wow.
So I've been gone more than I've been here on Instagram this year. I think that's just a specific person who hates me, which, I mean, little do they know I actually hate Instagram, so it's not a big deal. But, you know,
It's not a huge insult.
It's still a little frustrating that people just like report you because they don't like you. Like, I don't love that. But yeah, it's a constant challenge, but you know, I keep trying to just do what I can using kind of code words instead of my older videos. I would say cannabis instead of cannabis.
Yes.
Using like the THC, the T is like a little plant, like the plant emoji. There's different ways to get around it, but it is very frustrating because you're really like limiting yourself and like decreasing the value of your content, but you have to. It's like you're forced to do that to be able to like put a video up, and then oftentimes it's still like shadow banned because they know you're talking about drugs, you know, natural products, anything. So it's difficult.
It's really frustrating that there is absolutely, I mean, it's been my experience with all of these social media companies, and different ones vary. Like LinkedIn seems to be very open about cannabis content and doesn't seem to police it at all. TikTok has been very severe. I tried to start a TikTok channel back in 2019 or so. And I mean, very quickly, because curious about cannabis, like I'm screwed from the beginning because I have cannabis in the name. So every video, like it'd be up for a day and then taken down, warning. I was like, well, like this is exhausting. Instagram has been better, but I can see trends where my reach and things will plummet for apparently no reason. And like the style of content things doesn't change. And so there's all sorts of shenanigans going on with social media and trying to get content out there. And they don't care whether you're a scientist trying to just spread evidence-based information, whether you're, you know, it really doesn't matter. It just comes down to words, which is insane because it's like we have to be able to talk. We have to be able to communicate and share ideas. There's got to be some nuance there. But I also understand what you're saying of, you know, really if anyone wants to target you and report your posts constantly, I mean, that can do a lot of damage. And that's really hard to rectify. I mean, have you tried to talk to, like, have you asked Instagram, like, is this based on someone reporting me, you know, is there a trend there or anything like that?
I recently have got a contact at Instagram, and I'm trying to ask him, like, hey, is this like a specific person who keeps doing this? Or is it like, am I actually doing something that's that bad that I need to be removed from the internet? Or like, you know, can I just get a little bit of feedback here? But as you know, like research or not like contacting anyone at any of these companies is so difficult. And it's a constant challenge. And also, I guess I should probably also finish the first question you asked to just how I ended up at like real isolates and Smokenol, because I tend to not finish answering questions. But Dr. Miyabi Shields eventually saw my TikTok videos and like emailed me right as the pandemic was slowing down. And it was like, hey, do you want to like meet up for coffee for whatever in Newport, Rhode Island, because I was at URI at the time and they were in the Boston area. So we meet up and we were supposed to talk about like something very specific, and we just ended up talking about like the unknowns of natural products forever, which we love talking about, and just kind of like nerding out about the very, very niche specifics about about natural products, about cannabis, and eventually they were like, I'd love for you to come work with me, and that's kind of how that ended. Like, we worked together at Smokenol, and
Awesome.
it was an awesome journey. So yeah, just wanted to finish that before we move on too far.
Yeah, thanks for connecting it back around. That's so cool. I didn't realize that they found you that way. I had an assumption that you two knew each other before all of that. So that's really cool to know. I didn't realize that. And so getting into talking about the unknowns and sort of the the really interesting frontiers of natural product science. Where did the focus on cannabis smoke come from? Was that something you had already been thinking about? Obviously the chemistry of the smoke has to be different than the plant to some degree. So how did those discussions kind of come about? Of like, let's start to look into this and really see what we can do with that.
Yeah, it was really Andy Westerkamp, who is part of the Real Isolates team, and Miyabi, who started looking into the smoke, and I was looking into CBD degradation products like separately at the same time, which is really interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I'll start with what I was doing because I just know that better from my perspective. But, we were studying the permeability of CBD through the skin, and essentially, like, can we calculate the rate that's happening, and can we add any surfactants, emulsifiers, et cetera, to increase the permeation of CBD? So I was doing all these experiments, but then I was noticing on the HPLC that, as we leave these compounds out, more and more compounds are created. So I was like, well, that's, I had a billion side projects during grad school because I love side projects. And so I started just taking CBD isolate and putting it into different solvents and just leaving them in the window and just seeing, like analyzing them through time and just seeing what compounds were produced through time. And it is pretty amazing. Like just within a week, we had 12 compounds that were of like appreciable amounts from that original pure 99.9% pure CBD. So I'm doing this. I'm researching the different like quinone compounds that are produced when CBD degrades. Yeah. And there's studies, peer-reviewed studies about these quinone compounds, how they could potentially be anti-cancer compounds. Essentially, what are each of these peaks and what could they potentially be good for? Because I think we often immediately associate degradation with like useless. It's like, oh,
right. Sad negative connotation.
Right. It's like our pure perfect molecule has degraded and now it's useless. And so at the same time, Andy and Miyabi were taking CBD isolate and burning it on a dab rig or an oven or something, and then analyzing that on HPLC, and they're seeing like you start with one compound and you have about 18 after. So I think both of us at the same time are kind of thinking like, what is the chemistry of these degradation products? And if this is just one molecule, what happens to the other 100 different cannabinoids when they're exposed to heat or light? And what is the pharmacology of these compounds? Because, that still remains a mystery. I think everyone's looking to us to answer these questions. And it's like, well, we need about $10 million more before we can figure out the pharmacology of all these super rare and minor compounds. But like, we are also
NMR and
well, exactly. and like 10 more people with a very niche specialty. But I think what that led to is just some simple survey data, which is like, okay, do you prefer smoking? Do you prefer edibles? Like, what is the way you prefer to consume? And, one of those initial surveys is 80% of people, specifically medical patients that were surveyed, preferred smoking. But it's clearly not a viable option for a lot of people who are using medical cannabis, because if you're already compromised in some way, you don't want to introduce smoke into your body if you're trying to heal yourself in a health situation. So the idea was, can we capture these active compounds that are produced during the smoking process, make that into an extract that we can put into products to allow people to feel more similar to what it feels like to be smoking compared to like a traditional edible experience. And of course, it's never going to be exactly the same. It's not going to be the same onset time, and your body's still going to metabolize those compounds in ways that we're still not 100% sure of like exactly what's happening. But we wanted to offer a different option that that felt different for people, to feel similar and to have an option that they didn't have in the past.
Oh, right. And I mean, something like my background in the cannabis space was primarily in the early days in the analytical labs. And it was something I always wondered about, because it was, just thinking about it, it's like, I wondered, why hasn't anyone tried to make a smoke extract? Because everyone claims, and I mean, I'm a cannabis user, I can attest to this very strongly, that, vaping and smoking, very, very different effects. I'm one of those patients that prefer smoking. In general, I don't really like vaping. It doesn't have the same effects. I've got spinal cord injuries and things that I'm very specific about. And so it's been on my mind for a long time, like, why hasn't this been done already? And then when I saw Real Isolates come out and I saw the Smokenol product, I was like, finally, someone, now I know that there's someone out there who's thinking along the same lines, that has the resources to actually make this happen and get this out there. And you're right, there are a lot of nuances. You have metabolites to wonder about. The effects are going to be a little different. But this is about as close as you can get currently without actually smoking. And I mean, and that's the real takeaway, that like this is as close as you can possibly get, and there's always more R&D that can be done, improvements to be made, things to understand. But I mean, as a patient myself, I was extremely excited to see that this exists and that this kind of product development was happening, because I had been teaching about the fact, I was like, you're all excited about these terpenes and cannabinoids, but once you heat them up, there's a lot of changes that happen. And so, people were trying to predict effects based off of test data, and I had to constantly tell people, like, the data I'm giving you is not enough for you to be able to predict how this is going to affect you, much less someone else, for a variety of reasons. And that's a big one. So this was really cool for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, a lot of scientists that had been kind of in the back of our heads wondering about this for a while. And so I'm interested, what has been the feedback from people that have been using it?
So we make products with hemp. So they are CBD dominant, but they contain the other minors and rares. Has pretty appreciable levels of CBT. We see CBE, we see CBL, these different compounds. We do take survey data because we're really curious, because it's unique chemistry. It's unique pharmacology as well. So we do take survey data, and it's been really amazing. One of our first surveys with our first 200 customers, we asked them a variety of different questions. I won't go through all of them, but I think the most impactful were, do you think this product feels different than other CBD products? And mind you, like 99% of people have tried other CBD products. And about 80% said that it did. And about 80% also said that it worked better than these other CBD products. One of the best reviews that I think we ever got was, I think this is what people think CBD should feel like. Because, often people are taking CBD and they're like, I don't feel anything. And it's like, well, you're not really supposed to. And, but people do say they feel a noticeable effect from taking our product, and I think that encourages them to keep taking it, because you have that kind of immediate feedback. It does not feel similar to a THC product, but when you use a THC product, you feel it, right? You feel the pharmacology in your body. So I think that's just something that helps people continue to use the products, because they can feel better noticeably. But kind of back to like the technology and what you were talking about, being like, why hasn't anyone done this? I think you as a scientist and as an educator, you have a good grasp on like smoke, and that those are like molecules in the smoke, right? Yeah. But I think a huge obstacle has been communicating this with patients and the public, and trying to, tell them what we're doing, because it is really cool. But the concept of capturing active compounds from smoke is a very abstract concept in general, especially, a lot of people don't know what a molecule is, and that's totally fine. But, when you're starting there, and then you have to, go into different reactions in your body, different reactions to the smoking, the way we describe it to a lot of people who know about a few different cannabinoids is, THC partially degrades to CBN when smoked, right? But again, that's happening with almost every other compound. So like CBD converts to CBND, but also CBD can convert to CBE. CBC can convert to CBL. You have this kind of really unique suite of compounds that are produced during the heating process. But although we know that the technology is really cool, the product's really cool, the communication barrier has been the main obstacle with Profound Naturals, the products that we create.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this discussion will go to some length to help with that. It's challenging. We often, especially as scientists, we often overestimate general public scientific literacy. And this isn't a knock on anyone. It's just the way it is. Particularly in the United States, public scientific literacy is not great. And this goes back to my own rants that I like to have occasionally about public education systems and the role of science in communication in general. But people are often starting out at a lower level than we often assume they are. And again, that's not knocking anybody. It's a result of the systems in place as they are right now. So I could see that it is a challenge. Like, how do you get someone to appreciate the quality differences when they're still just trying to understand, what is a chemical and what does it mean for something to even degrade or change? And this idea that you had that people often think of degradation as a negative connotation. Why would I want to consume something that's degraded? And recognize it no, it's just unique. It's transformed. Transform is a much better word than degrade, because then that communicates it's just changed into something different. It doesn't mean that it's worse or it's a different tool now for potentially different applications. You mentioned CBND. I want to ask you about this because back in 2014 or so is when I started teaching about cannabis, and I've been talking about CBND for a long time. Not one person had ever heard of it. You're the first person on the podcast to ever mention that molecule, cannabinoids. There's speculation that it has some mild THC-like effects. Have you encountered that at all?
Well, it's really hard telling because CBT is also kind of molecularly similar to THC. So I think that I've never tried CBND in isolation. I've tried almost none of the cannabinoids in isolation because that's just not what I'm interested in. But I think that there is evidence that either both of those molecules or one of those molecules is acting similar to THC, but probably in a much more mild way, or maybe it's just that it's in such less quantities in the product that it feels like it's in such a less potency kind of a way. But I think CBND is a really interesting molecule. It's really hard finding standards for it, at testing labs.
I tried. They're restricted.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is another thing we struggle with a lot. So we obviously post our COAs of our products online. We want to be as transparent as possible with our customers. But this is no fault to the testing labs because they need to be high throughput and they need to have consistency. Right. But, we do have these unique compounds in our products, and we want to be able to show that to people. But we're usually limited by the standards that are offered at the testing lab. So something like CBND, not usually quantified. Even CBT, which I mentioned, we have we'll have up to 7% or something like that in our distillate or in our products.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's interesting. But when you run analytical, when you're running an HPLC or an LCMS, whatever, CBT comes off the column a lot later than the other cannabinoids. So typically, if we want CBT run as part of our normal testing routine, they have to run a unique analysis for us that has a longer method. And it's not that absurd, but also we'll see these peaks in the chromatograms that we still don't even know what they are, but they are very likely a cannabinoid because they're coming off the column at the same retention time. But we're just limited by standards. And that's something I think we're working with a lot of different people to try to help this issue. And I think even looking at different analysis and visualization techniques, I think we'll be able to get to a point where we can really deconvolute exactly the chemical entities in our product. But, you know, as kind of we're talking about before, some of what we believe in is the unknown. There are some unknowns. Right. And we don't believe that's a bad thing, because I take so many different natural products. I drink so many different teas, and I can guarantee you we don't know all the compounds in those teas and in these tinctures.
Yes.
But, you know, I say it came from nature. I trust it. It makes me feel good. I'm going to continue taking it. If it makes me not feel good, I'm going to stop taking it. And that's just kind of the way I go about natural products, which of course is not practical for everyone to go about their, you know, their medicine that way of just like, oh, whatever feels good. Because I mean, if you struggle with something like debilitating pain, anxiety, migraines, something like that, you know, maybe you do need to go to a pharmaceutical to find relief and start to enjoy your life, and to be able to have the effort and the time and the energy to start researching other methods of healing. Nothing's black and white ever. And pharmaceutical medications really do make it easy for patients. You know, you go to the doctor and they say, okay, you're struggling with this. I'm going to give you this pill. You take it once or twice a day at this dose, and you should feel better in this amount of time, right? But as you know, natural products are so much more complex, and they're shockingly a lot less accessible to people. You know, like
high quality.
High quality, and just information on them, and just trying to learn, like, you know, 60% of pharmaceutical drugs come from natural products, but often that's not really translated or like kind of given to the public in a digestible way. It's like, okay, well, what natural products are they from? Can I just take the crude extract of the natural products instead of the refined version from the pharmaceutical field? So, I mean, I think that's somewhere natural products needs to extend in more. It's just being more accessible for people who want that other option, who don't have the time to read 8 books and go on PubMed and start to look at the structure-activity relationship of the active compound in that pharmaceutical to the closest natural product. Like, that's not really a feasible option.
Although with the way AI is developing, maybe soon you'll
hope
be able to ask. You know, there's some really cool work going on, you know, sort of separately. I don't know if you're familiar with the company Silera that is in the psychedelic space.
Yeah.
I've had them on the podcast before, but you know, they've been working on these AI platforms to screen compounds from natural products and things like that. And it's exciting to think that eventually that kind of technology could be used to bridge some of these potential gaps that people have. Going back to what you said about the pharmaceuticals being sourced from natural products, that's something that drives me crazy relentlessly, because people, the general public, often have an assumption that pharmaceuticals are synthetic, and another assumption that synthetic means not natural. So two convoluted assumptions, and one, you know, synthetic just means it has been synthesized in some way. You have to be specific. What kind of synthesis? Because biosynthesis is a synthesis. And a lot of these pharmaceuticals, while yes, they're being synthesized either in bioreactors or, you know, chemically in labs, they were originally discovered and sourced from the plants. And can still be found there. And like you said, it's like 60% of pharmaceuticals. I mean, this is a massive amount of drugs that we rely on that all come directly from nature. And there's an interesting trend that I'm sure you've noticed in recent years where pharmaceutical companies themselves are kind of walking backwards a little bit and trying to create blends of natural products, you know, these new polypharmaceuticals, as they call them, which is a drug of many drugs, which is really what natural products are. All natural products are polypharmaceuticals, if you think about it. It's a lot of interesting dynamics, and I think that a lot of companies sometimes prey on that ignorance that the general public has, you know, about those things. That they've become so disconnected. But yeah, maybe one day there will be systems in place where someone can say, okay, I need to understand, what potential medicinal plants or diet changes or lifestyle changes will impact this condition, in meaningful ways. And it can say, yeah, maybe you should do what everyone's been telling you in the first place. Eat better, move more, meditate. I
am so glad you brought that up, because it really, I often describe natural products as a lifestyle. And oftentimes you don't even want to put something in your body unless you have to. So you do have to look at your lifestyle. And so, as you know, I've recently been struggling with more and more migraines. So I'm trying to figure out what can I do about this? So, I go to the doctor and she immediately writes me a prescription. And I'm like, no, I'm not comfortable with that now. I'd rather wait and see if I can, figure out other things. And if nothing else works, yes, I'll try that medication. So I asked to get some blood work done. And what the blood work showed was that my vitamin D levels were extremely, extremely low. And so if anyone knows about vitamin D, essentially your brain uses tryptophan, and there's an enzyme, I think it's called tryptophan hydrolase 2, and that enzyme requires vitamin D to convert tryptophan into serotonin, which a lot of migraines are a result of a lack of serotonin or some
controlling blood vessel dilation and constriction. Yeah.
Exactly. So I was like, well, that's interesting. So I immediately started taking more and more vitamin D. I don't know if this has worked yet, but I'm also trying some other natural products for if I acutely get a migraine and I need to immediately solve that. So a plant that I've recently tried, the root of what they call devil's claw. It's only called devil's claw because it looks like... So it's an African plant that I just purchased some of. But, the molecular structure of the active compound in that plant kind of resembles the tryptophan molecules that are used for migraines. So I had a terrible migraine yesterday, and I tried to make some tea out of that. And, I don't know if it was because I was on hour 6 of my migraine and it was already going away. But after I drank the tea, I was like, I feel a lot better. And what's really interesting is the more you look into that plant, devil's claw, there's a compound, I think it's called harpagoside. And the studies with that active compound show that when it's in isolation, it does not work as well as a less refined extract, whether it's a fraction or a crude. But the pure compound, which they thought was responsible for most of the activity, was not fully responsible. So it has to be some synergy within that plant. They haven't found one single compound. And I think that's where the beauty of natural products is. I think it's often not just one compound, but the pharmaceutical view of it is to isolate the most active compound from that plant and try to make that into a drug and try to make it even more potent. Where I think there's some beauty in having a diversity of compounds that are less potent, so you have less adverse effects, and then you have, as you mentioned, kind of this polypharmacology happening, and in my opinion can lead to greater benefits for whatever condition that you're looking for. But again, that's a lot of effort to go through, to try to better your health. And a lot of people don't have the time and they don't have the resources and they need immediate relief. So it's really, you got to do whatever's best for you and whatever's best for your lifestyle and what's most accessible to you. And, you can always take it step by step, start with a pharmaceutical if that's what you're comfortable with, and then start researching other things. But yeah, you have to do whatever's best for you.
Absolutely. And I think something that is often underappreciated is access to some of these tools can be a privilege. I mean, not everybody has access to either certain plants or pharmaceutical. It can go either way. And one thing that sometimes bothers me with educators that focus on health education is they'll say, well, everybody needs to be doing this and this and this and this. And it's like, that all is great. And yes, in an ideal world, yes. But everyone is dealing with the whatever limitations they have in this world, in their situation. And so I'm glad you said that, because it is very individualized, both on a physiological level, but also like a socioeconomic level too. That, I mean, not everybody has access to all of these tools or the same quality of tools. One thing that I would love to see more of is just more appreciation for the quality of these herbs. There's the natural products industry is huge. And with all of the fraud and issues in the cannabis industry, we see the same stuff everywhere else in the natural products industry. At least with cannabis, you don't have to worry so much about identity fraud. I mean, we at least know it's cannabis. Whereas in natural products broadly, you really have to worry about, is this ground up plant material that has been mailed to me, is that actually what they say it is?
Dude, part of what I worked on in grad school was also working with the FDA to look at adulteration of supplements within the natural product industry. So, we were working on a genetic repository. Essentially, if somebody gets sick from taking some sort of supplement, they go to Walmart, they buy a supplement, they take it, they get sick. That supplement is sent to the FDA, where they can do genetic analysis on it and figure out if it's one single plant, if it's what it's supposed to be, if there's another plant in there. And, so part of what I was doing was helping with that. But as you're saying, the issue is you could have like a field of a certain medicinal plant. I don't know, pick your poison, any
Echinacea.
Medicinal plant. Sure, echinacea. And there could be like one plant in the Solanaceae family that produces these tropane alkaloids, right? So you could be harvesting that whole field and accidentally harvest a couple of these pretty dangerous plants. Grind it all up, and a couple of those pills are going to have a bit more than the other ones. People are going to take that and they're going to get sick. So it does happen. It's really not regulated that well. I mean, how could you regulate that? It would be so much effort. But they're trying to at least get a way of immediately identifying when something like that happens so that they can remove all those from the shelf and then protect the people that are trying to help themselves. And also what you're kind of talking about with the many, many barriers of both pharmaceuticals and natural products. The educational barrier is a huge one, because even if I Google what plant is good for a headache and I find one, and I get a bag of roots ground up in the mail, well, then what? Do I extract it in alcohol? Do I extract it in water? What's the dose? How much should I be taking? What time of the day should I be taking it? I mean, there's so many different factors. And as I mentioned before, I think one of the biggest limitations is always time. It takes a lot of time to research, takes a lot of time to make those products, takes a lot of time to learn what products work best for you. And if you are already struggling with something that is very time sensitive, you can't be doing that. It's just not practical.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's a shame that as a culture, herbalists have they don't have as much respect as they used to have. And it used to be a situation where most communities would have a noted herbalist, which that's early pharmacists were herbalists. And so you kind of had the community person to go to ask these questions, to get that feedback very quick. But now, medical doctors are not trained in pharmacognosy. Like they're separated. Pharmaceutical science, pharmacognosy, even in higher learning and everything, they're treated as very separate things, very separate schools, usually. And the schools of thought are different, and there's not cross-training that happens unless the physician goes out of their way to get that cross-training. And so it's a shame that, that sort of community point of reference has really been eroded when it comes to natural products and herbal medicine. And maybe we're seeing kind of the rebuilding of that with educators, utilizing the internet to try to establish those points of connection again. But I think that's something that a lot of people have not thought about. Like, you don't have your neighborhood. I mean, some of us do, I guess, but in general, we don't have our neighborhood herbalist to go, chat with and just tell me real quick, like, what tea do I need? How do I need to make it? I have a buddy of mine, Travis, who has been featured on the podcast before, who went to Bastyr, a huge herbalist guy. And so he's my go-to. Like, anytime there's a situation, like, dude, just tell me quick strokes, like, what do I need to be thinking about? But everybody really needs access to that kind of understanding, like not just raw data like you can get in a Google search, but a mind behind that information to conceptualize it, to contextualize it in a way that makes sense, that's digestible for people really quickly. And I don't know, maybe that's the sort of the roles we're starting to play, but it's I hope that's something people will think more about. We go to the doctor to try to get help with all these chronic conditions and everything, but if you are trying to take a different route, who do you go to? Who do you trust? How do you evaluate the sources of that information? I think that's a huge thing. Is natural products is such a big industry, and there's so much money wrapped up in it, just like everything else, that you do have to be skeptical of the sources of education. What companies are they connected to? What are their biases? What are their inherent motivations? And so even with those points of contact, it's still right now so complicated for people.
It is very, very complicated. And as you say, like, it is very difficult to find a herbalist that is trained well and also can take in these other nuances of life that we've also been talking about, whether it's your diet, your environment, the people that you hang out with. I mean, all of these things contribute to your health. Yeah. And also, I mean, so when I was in grad school, getting my degree in pharmaceutical sciences, but specializing in natural product chemistry, I was pretty much the only one who actually used natural products too, which was super surprising to me. Like, I would, come in being like, I made elderberry syrup for everyone. And they're like, oh, I'm not taking that. And I'm like, what? Like,
weirdo.
Yeah, I was like, I worked really hard on this. Like, I thought you would enjoy this gift.
Of all people, like, surely this would be the crew that would appreciate it.
Yeah, so that's like also my biggest pet peeve is like when you spend the time making like these awesome things for people and they just don't appreciate them. But that's okay. You learn. But yeah, I mean, we need more qualified herbalists for sure. And there are different platforms online where people are kind of learning the different herbalist techniques and the different ways to learn about herbs. But realistically, you really do need that hands-on experience, at least partly at some point, even if it's growing a few herbs in your garden and starting to understand even just like the aromas, how even the smells make you feel. The essential oils. There's so many different ways to learn about it. And I think, again, I keep talking about time, but a huge barrier is it takes a really long time to learn about all these different herbs. It is not quick. And you really do need a grasp of pharmacology and chemistry to be an herbalist. And I think that's kind of what you talked about in the beginning, where cannabis can be a really, really good introduction because you can feel those molecules working in your body and you can really start to understand how different strains are affecting you in different ways. Those molecules are making you feel different ways. The different consumption methods, why is that making you feel different? And that is a great introduction because a lot of other herbs are going to be similar in the sense that, the consumption method absolutely matters. The dose matters. Sometimes you can feel them working in your body. And not everyone should self-experiment. Really not if you don't have a good grasp of it, because all, natural products can be dangerous, especially if the dose is incorrect. Even if it's a crude extract. A lot of times I talk about crude extracts being a lot safer than isolated compounds, and just because the potency is different, but that's not the case for all of them. Yeah, it just depends. And
don't consume a dish
of
extract.
Well, exactly, right? Yeah. So there's so many nuances, so many details. But there are resources out there if you want to learn. And I'm sure there's a lot of herbalists out there that would love to have somebody like learning with them, somebody to teach, somebody to hand down that knowledge to if you reach out to the right people.
Well, and you're kind of touching on the role of, there's several things that pop into my mind here, prior to the 1930s or so, 1920s, or around that time, a lot of herbal knowledge was kind of passed down in families as well. Like as you grew up, you learned what these plants were around you, how they were utilized in foods, medicines, and things like that. And so you had essentially a lifetime to build an experiential association with these plants. then that, over, just the path of industrialization, we've become very disconnected. And so now folks in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, are coming at this realizing, like, I don't know anything. Like, I haven't been taught anything about any of this. So there's no framework to build upon. And I hope to see that change culturally. I mean, we need to be better connected to what I call our wild neighbors. We really need to reestablish that connection, because then a lot of these issues become a little less overwhelming. And I also think you touched on, the fact that a lot of people in these programs studying natural products are not actually using natural products. I relate this to the difference between theoretical and experiential learning. Like, in order to become a well-rounded individual, you have to marry those two things to some degree. Like, if you're specializing in studying something, you've in some way, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to consume all of these things, but you should be touching these plants at some point. You should be experimenting with making products at some point, to just learn the things that only come out when you're experiencing them. It's hard to like even put words on it, but there are things that click when you've been studying something and then you're working with a plant that may not have ever clicked before. And again, something that's very kind of underappreciated, there's sort of a mentality these days that you can get it all from a book or from Google. And there's just always those gaps. And I wanted to make sure to use this because I know we're getting limited on time. This has gone by really, really fast.
I agree.
But I wanted to make sure to touch on, as we're talking about all these other natural products, what are some of your favorite natural products beyond cannabis? So I always love to learn that about folks that are really into this stuff.
Yeah, my number one favorite that I take every single day is chaga, Ananatis obliquus.
Nice.
I actually recently made a video about it. And part of that is I live in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. There's chaga all around me. And as you said, I really do believe in using the things around me as much as possible. And for any people that are interested in getting into natural products, I would highly recommend looking at the plants that naturally grow around you first. It's a very accessible option to get into, herbalism, natural products. You don't even need to grow them in a garden. You can go out and forage on public land for these different things. So so chaga is probably my favorite, and that's another product that I really enjoy because I can feel it working in my body. I take chaga every single day, and if I don't take it for a few days, I notice differences in my body. And I think if you've ever taken chaga, the extract is black. It is so cool. Yeah. It is so rich. It's so dark. And it's one of the best natural sources of antioxidants. It has some really interesting steroid molecules that can be great for anti-inflammatory benefits. Has these fungi in general have these uniquely linked sugars that when you're digesting them in your body kind of recognizes that, hey, we don't make those sugars and plants don't make those sugars. So what are these? So it kind of just activates your immune system to being on its toes, to being like, okay, we have something foreign in here, but it can still break it down eventually. But you're still kind of keeping your system on its toes by introducing that foreign sugar molecule and having your body just have to break that down in different ways than it's used to seeing sugar molecules from plants. That's probably my number one favorite. I do like echinacea, but I think I mostly just like the flower from echinacea the best. Mm-hmm. But so I studied the medicinal plant garden at the University of Rhode Island. And then when I was leaving, the master gardener there gave me a bunch of medicinal plants. So now I have my own medicinal plant garden at my house. So I have a pretty wide variety of different plants. But honestly, some of my favorites are plants that are used all the time, like spearmint. It's just rosemary. Yeah. I think rosemary is one of the best antibacterial compounds.
I love rosemary. Yeah.
When I was doing, I was looking for essentially new antibiotic compounds from plants from the medicinal plant extract library, and rosemary. Almost every test we did, rosemary just came at the top, and I'm like, that is amazing. I have a whole new view of this plant. because of these assays that I was running in grad school. It really is kind of a cure-all. And you'll see it referred to as like a cure-all in these different textbooks. But it's cool, as we were talking about, to do that hands-on work and to see that it is true even with modern techniques. And, we were talking about gaining a certain sense of knowledge by extracting plants or growing plants or just using your hands with these different natural products. I talk about it a lot on TikTok and these other channels. Is I think that's kind of a form of forced intention. If you are the one making those products, you're allocating time and energy, you're doing your research, you're taking the effort to make your medicine. And during that process, whether you know it or not, you are thinking about it. You're thinking about why you're using that product, why you're extracting that product, what you're extracting out of that product. And I mean, I'm a very spiritual person, but spirituality has implications in science too. It's been shown to be a predictive variable in the placebo response. So people who are spiritual tend to do better on things, even if it is placebo, because they believe that that product is working for them. And the belief alone, the spirituality, the faith in the unknown can have measurable outcomes. And I think that's just another really important part about making your own medicine. Even if you mess up, like you're still taking the time to do it. You're still learning, and you won't mess up again, or at least not in the close future.
Not in the same way.
Not in the same way. Exactly.
Well, it's true. And there's a book I'll plug that I read a long time ago that I loved that kind of touches on some of the science behind belief and neuroplasticity and stuff like that. But I think it's just called The Mind and the Brain by Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz. I think he's out of UCLA. Really, really great book. But anyone, wanting to specifically dive into some of the science behind belief and how it affects the brain and physiology, it is something that is understudied, underappreciated. Again, placebo has like a negative connotation. And this is actually something in my interview with Dr. A.D. Ray in the last episode, we talked about placebo as well. So it's funny it's coming up again. But I think it's something people need to think about more. Placebo, unrightfully so, has a negative connotation, and belief absolutely does impact pharmacology in ways we do not understand very well. We know that the endocannabinoid system, for instance, is tied into how the pain placebo response works, which makes studying cannabinoids and pain a little challenging when you're trying to separate placebos when the system you're trying to test generates that effect. But it's important for people to take note of that kind of stuff does matter. And I wanted to ask you too on the rosemary piece. Have you ever been in a room where rosemary has been extracted with in a supercritical fluid extractor?
No, I haven't. Does it smell amazing?
Oh my God, yes. Yes, it does. And it's unique versus if you're tincturing and doing other things, because you don't have the smells of the alcohols or other solvents blending in. And oh my gosh, I was part of a research experiment in one of the last companies I worked for. We were examining rosemary and particularly different components of the extracts. And oh, I loved it. I loved it when they were doing runs for rosemary. And I'm really glad you brought up that plant, because that's one that I've always grown. I've always been attracted to rosemary. I've always had it around. I've got it on my deck right now. It's my best, plant that I have out there. And it's a very resinous plant. It's one my daughter loves to go out there and grab rosemary and smell it. She'll bring it to me and tell me to eat it, which I do happily. And it's one that when I ask people about medicinal plants, they like, no one talks about rosemary other than in the context of like pleasant aromas and stuff. But there is some strong medicinal value. And this also ties into, I think, some of your prior work, because in some of your prior research on antibiotic resistance and that sort of thing. So I think that's really cool that you shed light on that plant, because I think a lot more people need to know that rosemary is quite interesting medicinally, and it grows really well. I mean, there are different varieties, but it grows really well almost everywhere.
You can grow like rosemary trees. Like those things get huge. And yeah, I mean, again, like I loved doing antibiotic work because a lot of times you're like, you have these agar plates essentially with bacteria on the top. You put your plant extract on a little disc and then you put that on top of the lawn of bacteria. You come back the next day and anything visual is amazing in the lab. It's just like immediately gratifying rather than working with like a clear liquid that you put another clear liquid in and you mix.
I see the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just so cool to immediately, with your eyes, compare the potency of these different extracts against these certain bacterial strains. So like rosemary was very effective against MRSA, like Staph aureus, which was really interesting. We had a pretty substantial amount of different plant extracts that were active against these different bacteria, and it just makes you think. Like, could we just give people a rosemary cream? Like, would that actually solve the issue? And what we know about that, too, is that when we have complex extracts that have all these diversity of different compounds, the bacteria develop resistance a lot slower compared to a pure compound because the pure compound is going to work in the same way every single time. Essentially to fight against that bacteria. So there's like a variety of different ways that can happen. But when you have, hundreds of different molecules in that plant extract that might work in slightly different ways, the bacteria doesn't know how to adapt to that. It doesn't know how to mutate in a way that's not susceptible to all those different things. So you get a lot more time because it needs to like one by one essentially mutate and be able to continue growing in the presence of these plant compounds. So the entire time, and you very early in this conversation kind of brought up these new pharmaceutical treatments that have these different active ingredients. And, I was thinking about that the whole time. Like, could we even add this as like a adjunct therapy with something else that prevents the resistance from happening, just to essentially confuse the bacteria? And I think we will see more and more of that. I know people are working on that. And I think that's a great place for like non-refined natural products within the pharmaceutical industry. And it's something that I think could really advance the industry in very positive ways.
I totally agree. I think there is a pathway to getting these natural products in, and particularly their extracts, because the extracts, they can be standardized to some degree. So that makes it easier to get them through than just raw herbs. But I think there's a solid place for them in the medical food category, at least in the United States, in the way that things are handled here. There are other countries where this is not that big of a problem. But in the United States particularly, there is a medical food category where a lot of these things, I mean, ginkgo is a very common example that I frequently refer to. There are standardized ginkgo extracts that you can be prescribed that are, very chemically diverse extracts. They have been standardized to a certain potency for certain compounds, but they do still represent, the other chemistry that is in the plant. So there's a path. And then it's like, how do you get these extracts and things used to actually treat real conditions? I think the adjunct therapy approach is exactly the way, like I said, at least in the United States, to get these things integrated into our healthcare systems in a more meaningful way. At least that's my hope. That's my optimistic view of where I could see things going to get to a better place. But still a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And, just while we're on the topic of, chemical diversity and diversity in general, like, I think one of the best things that you can do to maintain good health and to maintain like resiliency in your body is to eat a diverse diet. And, simpler the better, in my opinion. But again, that depends on what you have available to you. But, trying out, if you start to learn to forage and, trying out these different fungi, trying out these different plants, even in the grocery store, try a vegetable you haven't tried, try these different things. Really diversifying your diet can keep your body on its toes, and maybe you're providing something that you don't even know your body needs, but you've never provided it before, and you can have these kind of advances in your health in ways that you didn't even think you needed because you're just expanding your diet and trying different things.
Yeah, get the rainbow carrots rather than the boring orange carrots all the time. Change up your, your flavonoid exposure and things, if nothing else. And I was going to point out too this interaction with bacteria and complex chemistry. Evolutionarily, this makes perfect sense. Like this, the reason that this is the way it is because these microorganisms and plants have been battling for ages for survival. And so it's one reason why plants produce such complex chemistry is that's helps them persist and survive. And in the same way that our bodies have many, many different routes to the same ends. And the endocannabinoid system is a great example of that. Like, we often talk about like FAW as being this anandamide enzyme, but it's like, no, FAW is a very broad enzyme that breaks down a lot of things, including 2-AG to a small degree. And there are a lot of generalized enzymes and compounds and things in our bodies that allow things to go in multiple chemical directions so that we have that flexibility, that plasticity.
Redundancy.
Yes, exactly. Redundancies. And so all of this sort of reminds us, these sort of discoveries are really a sort of remembering what nature has been doing all along. And so I think it's important to have that perspective. It's like, this all seems novel and cool, but also it's just nature. It makes sense. This is just the way things have played out evolutionarily.
Yeah, I mean, when we think, we look at nicotine from the tobacco plant. We look at THC or THCA, from the cannabis plant. There's many different plants that produce these molecules that are very similar to the compounds that are produced by our own bodies. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, like the plant, like we were meant to get high. And it's like, well, not really.
That's
like
a common question I get. Yeah.
No, it is. But I mean, realistically, it really all started with insects versus plants. Like insects were the reason those plants needed to produce those compounds. And we're not that far away from insects. The difference is when an insect is introduced to nicotine, it dies. When we're introduced to nicotine at, a different level, but still it stimulates us because it's still working in a similar way, but it's just we're such different organisms that we find pleasure when they find pain, and really all those early adaptations by plants were really against insects for the like the active molecules in our brain. And then as we're talking about as well, like fighting against bacteria, fighting against pathogenic fungi, like they're going to produce all these really unique molecules. Plants are, I mean, they are the best organic chemists in the world. They produce such interesting molecules, and frankly, we've only tapped the surface because still like even the plants
like
we've studied in the past. Yeah, and even the plants we've studied in the past, we've done it in such a reductionist way, as we kind of talked about, that we really only focused on the most potent. So what about all the other ones? And what about all the other targets that they could potentially be acting on? We're really only looking at one molecule and one target when we have hundreds of molecules and hundreds of targets. So it's still like the faith in the unknown. It's awesome. I think there's...
Exactly.
People think that this field is pretty far along. I think we're just in the very early stages of discovery. And we have new tools. Yes. We have all these different omics platforms now to visualize things in like a greater scope. And I think the research is going to be really cool in the next decade.
Yeah, I completely agree. We are it's better to think of our progress on almost a geological time scale than sort of a lifetime time scale, which is, generally how we look at it. And, I talked to Dr. Vincenzo DiMarzo a couple years ago or something. We were talking about the endocannabinoid talking about omics. And, he was sort of joking, not joking. He's like, it's going to take so many lifetimes before we really start to piece together how cannabis is really influencing a lot of these systems in a very direct, a way where we can then take that information and make really, really confident, meaningful predictions of what's going to happen on a, not on a sort of grand, like, how is this going to affect a medical condition, but on a molecular level of, like, what is going on and what can we draw from that to better use these tools and things. He really laughed. He's like, I've done what I've done in my lifetime. And I mean, anyone who's familiar with DeMarzo's work, he's done a lot. But, he's like, it's going to take so many more scientists and so many more lifetimes. And anyone who thinks that we know a lot just hasn't studied it enough to realize how little we actually know. And that should be, some people get kind of discouraged by that. I really try to point out that, like, no, that's a really exciting thing. Like, this is the frontier. You're seeing the frontier, and it's not always common that you can see the frontier ahead of you. And so to be able to articulate that and recognize it, it just means we're in a very exciting time. And it also presents a lot of opportunity especially for younger scientists that are just starting to get into these programs and wrestle with these ideas. It's like you have so much really low-hanging fruit of research available to you if you have the right perspective.
I love that.
The perspective has to come beyond the reductionist, tropes that have been ingrained since the 60s or so.
Yeah, the perspective is so important, and like creativity too. And it can feel like when you're in grad school, or even when you're in undergrad, or even when you're in high school, or wherever you are in life, it can feel like you kind of are funneled into something that is super niche. But if you have a good idea, write it down, research it. And if it's something you really, really want to study, like, there are ways to get funding for really good ideas that you have. And like, having a creative mind, I think, is like the best skill that a researcher can have, is looking outside the box. And it's really not something that can be taught. Like, you need to teach yourself by encouraging yourself to pursue these unique ideas, because one of them will land, like, eventually. I mean, like, a lot of the great discoveries have been just kind of these random thoughts. Maybe you think of them in the middle of the night and you write it down in your notebook or something. And then the next day you go back and you're like, oh, I think that has some legs to it. And you gotta believe in yourself, and you gotta pursue things. And I think, as you said, there's so much untapped potential, and the young people especially, like, definitely pursue your gut feeling. If you think something's interesting and there's no research on it and you have a pathway to pursue that, go for it.
Yep. It's, a lot of times what it boils down to, and this ties back into our early conversation on science communication, is how do you get people to see the value that you see? And once you can do that, a lot of doors open up. And sometimes that's the hardest part. And, I always also try to tell people, especially if I'm talking to a younger crowd at a college or something, it's not necessarily about the answers you discover, but it's about the better questions you learn to ask, because it's those questions that push you in a direction, not necessarily the answers that you get. And, that, I think that creativity piece, that's one reason why that's so important, because if you can exercise your creativity, you will ask better questions. And by asking better questions, that will take you into interesting directions that people maybe haven't gone to before or haven't spent much time. And then the other side that I want to highlight to what you just said, believing in yourself. Someone will do it. Why can't it be you? It's just a matter of doing it, making it happen. And I think a lot of people feel like things are beyond their reach, or that people they see that are accomplishing things must have some traits or resources or things they don't have. And sometimes that's true, but more often than not, there's just regular people that just chose to pursue what they were interested in, and they did it long enough and creatively enough that they made it work, and you can too.
And, exercising that part of your brain, like, having hobbies outside of science too, especially if you are a scientist, like you're clearly a musician, which is amazing. You know, I do a lot of different arts. Like I work with my hands a lot. I create a lot of things. I have an outlet for that creativity. And I always found that helpful in graduate school, not only as having like an escape, but having a different way to exercise your brain. If you're always doing the same thing and kind of thinking on the same pathways, your brain's going to be very good at those pathways, but not very good at the other pathways. You want to really exercise the different parts of your brain as much as you can. And it really can change your outlook and also just give you a different means of releasing energy and showing yourself what you have to offer, what you can create, what your brain is capable of doing. And I thought of some of my like best ideas while I was just like painting in grad school. And I was like, oh my God, that is so cool. And then I would just write it down somewhere else, finish my painting, go in the next day, like super motivated, super excited because I gave my brain a break and it resulted in something impactful.
Your neurons went in different directions than the same thought loops that they were rutted in. Yeah, absolutely. I find the same thing. Yeah, I definitely make music. I paint. I write poetry. It's something I take very seriously. And some of the best scientists I have met feel the exact same way and will tell you the exact same thing. Like, no, I'm not in the lab all the time. Like, what? No, like I've got to engage in other things and, get out and talk to people, leave the lab and experience things. And that's usually when the ideas come, when you're not sitting there digging the same rut in your brain over and over and over again over the problem. It's why people say sleep on it, It's like, give up on this problem for today, go to sleep, come back at it tomorrow, and maybe your neurons will go in a different direction. You'll see things slightly differently and get different ideas. And so, yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because it's a really important thing for me as well, the recognition of the role of creativity in science. And I think a lot of times people, and I promise I'm wrapping up, I think a lot of people assume scientists are not creative. There's like a weird disconnect. It's like, well, scientists are logical and analytical and, and then the artists are this or that. And I'm like, these are all bullshit labels that we like box people into. That makes no sense at all. Like, we are all everything, and you just do you. Follow, what makes sense to you. And you can be a scientist and be creative and, do this and do that, whatever. You don't have to think so narrowly. And in fact, you'll probably be more successful if you don't.
Yeah, I saw the most successful people and the most mentally healthy people that were in my cohort of grad school had other hobbies, other things that they did other than just being in the lab. A lot of people who just stayed in the lab and were like, I have to be here like 24/7. Your brain, your body, like that's not good for you. That is not good for you to just constantly be in this like bright white room, just pipetting and just reading and just trying to figure things out all day and talking to a diversity of people from different backgrounds too. Like, don't just talk to your science friends. Talk to people who have no idea what you're doing in grad school and just get different perspectives from them.
They'll ask you really interesting questions that you
always. Or they'll make you understand that you don't even know what you're talking about. And
exactly. You're like, wait, I'm trying to explain this. I don't know. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's all valuable. And just, again, that's diversity. Like, just whatever you can do to diversify your life, it's going to be good for you.
Absolutely. Well, I know we've gone almost an hour and a half, so well over what I planned. So I'll go ahead and get things wrapped up. But usually as I try to end the episodes, I like to hand off the platform to our guests. So let everybody know how to learn more about you, about real isolates and Smokenol, and just all the stuff. Whatever you want to plug, this is your time to lay it all out there.
Totally. Yeah, so online, my username is Cannabichem, and I post mainly on TikTok because, again, it's easy. I'm currently kicked off Instagram, but if they let me back on, same name. I have Cannabichem too, but that's not really fun. Anyway, YouTube, I'm also Cannabicam. If you want to follow our company, we have a Instagram under the name Smokenol, and then we have our product page where we make hemp smoke extracts. That is under Profound Naturals. And if you want to learn more about Real Isolates in general, that's kind of just the parent company, but you can go to realisolates.com to learn more about that. And yeah, and we also do have a podcast as well called Smoke and Science.
If you didn't say it. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, it's called Smoke and Science, and we post not very regularly, but it's a good time. Podcasts are just a great time. And again, thank you so much for having me on here. It was awesome to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I figured, like I said, with our overlapping interests, I figured this conversation would be interesting. And yeah, definitely was. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope that everyone listening, we hit some really big concepts in this conversation, like very transcendent concepts that I hope people, I hope it resonates with people and makes them think really critically about all these things: healthcare, science, creativity, all of these things. Because, like we said, education, all of this, it has a bigger role than just sharing things we think are neat. But we actually believe that this can help positively impact the world, help reduce any negative side effects of people engaging natural products and things. The more you know, the better you interact with these things. I mean, there's a lot to this. So I hope that this has been valuable and interesting. And yeah, definitely check out Smoke and Science. I've enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing more come out of that. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you back on Instagram again. That's hilarious. I had no idea you got banned again. So that means I caught you when I sent you that message when you came back. I caught you just in that little 2-day window.
Yeah, I was literally back for and I was literally like, yay, I'm back.
Yeah.
And then whoever keeps reporting me definitely saw me like celebrating. It was like, bye. And it reported me again.
And yeah, if we do another episode, we'll have to talk at length at some point about some of the interesting responses one gets to sharing scientific information about cannabis, because I'm sure you have run into similar issues that I've run into. There are certain topics that really press people's buttons, and there are a lot of emotional connections that people have with ideas that once they're challenged, they get really upset. And it's not the majority of people, but geez, the ones that do get upset. I've gotten some weird emails and threats and all sorts of craziness over the years.
I mean, I don't think I've had a single video that didn't make someone upset. Like that's the internet, though. You know, it's always user 45792. Yeah, it's in there like just hate commenting like crazy. And on TikTok, I don't always read all the comments because I don't want to introduce that negativity to my life. But I also just block people. I just hammer on that button. Like, I don't care at all. Yeah, if you're on my page, like, harassing me, like, I don't think that's rational for me to keep you around. So, you control your environment there, and if I have control over it, I will delete you.
Yeah, I have on our Discord server, I have a nice GIF that will play when I ban people that shows Thor bringing the hammer down. And I've only had to use it a few times, but it's hilarious when I get to. I actually look forward to it.
It's fun, yeah.
Anyway, with that being said, if you want to learn more about Curious About Cannabis, I think you probably know where to find us, but we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. For the reasons we just discussed, I do not enable comments on my YouTube videos for that very reason, which affects my reach and all sorts of other things, but we are on there. And thanks so much for listening all the way through this episode. I appreciate all of you, and I look forward to connecting with you again in the next episode. So thanks so much, everybody. Thanks so much, Dr. Kirk, for being here, and hopefully I'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Stay curious, everybody, and take it easy. Bye-bye. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get notified of more videos, and go ahead and check out another video while you're at it.